Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of Enforce technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by Enforce technology, only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.
Hello there and welcome to Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio in this episode of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, the podcast dedicated to our great volunteer fire service and also to the idea that true professionalism is never defined by a paycheck, and developing, displaying, and maintaining a professional image and a professional reputation, that's the duty and responsibility of all firefighters. Tom Merrill here. Thanks again for listening in. Here we are into the month of May. The weather is getting nice, and I'm still recovering from the great FDIC experience. Another absolutely phenomenal show. I had another great class with great, passionate, professional firefighters. It was definitely a 5-star week, as they always are. And I just met so many great people yet again. Whether it was in the classrooms or out in the hallways or out at night networking with people, so many great, wonderful people. And as I like to always say, it's just a reminder, the Maltese cross that we wear so proudly is just such a great reminder that there's still really good people in the world. For all the negativity, for all the naysayers and nastiness and judgmental people, you know what? Firefighters can truly exemplify that, hey, there's still good people out there. And a lot of times you don't have to look much farther than down the street to your local firehouse. So FDIC was phenomenal. My department brought a couple first-time attendees, and that was quite a treat because we always bring some officers and commissioners. A few years ago, we started bringing some firefighters, and this year we brought 2 that had never been to FDIC before, and what a treat it was to watch their reaction to everything during the course of the week, whether it was their training classes that they took, both hot and classroom, the opening ceremony, the classroom sessions, and of course, all the great things going on there at night. They really soaked it up. They loved every single minute of it. And I'll tell you, as a commissioner, that makes me feel good because they bring that back to the firehouse and energize other members and hopefully plant the seed about just how great it is to be in this fire service. And hopefully they can inspire not just themselves, but like I said, the other members back in the firehouse as well. So hopefully we'll do it again next year. And it's just so cool to see those first time attendees really, really soak it up. And the whole experience is amazing. I always tell my wife when I come home from conferences that I made 100 new friends, and this was no different because thank you to everybody that came to my class or reached out to me and wanted to track me down at night to see where I was. I met just great people like Chief Buzz Eckelkamp from the Washington, Missouri Fire Department, who got he got a hold of me ahead of time. He wanted to meet up. He came to my class. He wanted to network at night. We just didn't have a chance to make that happen, but just a truly wonderful man that I got to get to know a little bit. And he's also back home. He serves as a bank president. So you think he's got a lot going on. Matter of fact, he had to go home one night during the conference for a board meeting and then turn around and come back to FDIC. So he had a lot going on. And met some people from my own state, from the Long Island area of New York, some brothers from the North Sea Fire Department out on Long Island. They were in my class, and they tracked me down at night, and we met up and had some great conversation, and it was just incredible. My only regrets is that I couldn't do as much as I wanted to do, and I couldn't meet up with everybody that did want to meet up. And like I said, Chief Eckelkamp, who wanted to do some more networking at night, we just didn't have time between everything else going on. It was a whirlwind of a week. And I couldn't even host my podcast. If in case anybody's wondering, I couldn't even do my live podcast from FDIC this year just because of the scheduling between went to classes, but also had to sit in a book booth and do some other activities. So just had no time. And yeah, I did go to classes too. I think I went to 11 classes. As a fire commissioner, I go as a presenter, or I did this year. But I also go as a fire commissioner, and I feel obligated to go to training classes. Training never ends. And even me, 42 years in as a commissioner, I'm going to classes, and I printed out 11 certificates, and they're in my personnel file at the firehouse, and a great, great week. And I hope someday, if you've never been, you get a chance to go. Everything was just phenomenal, except the flight home. Flying, and our guest knows all about this from all his flying. There's actually my first time in all the years I've been going to FDIC, both as a presenter and over 25 times as an attendee. This was my really first major airline snafu. I was supposed to leave at noon and be home in Buffalo by 4:30. Had plans to go out to dinner with my wife and catch up since we hadn't seen each other in a week. Well, instead of leaving noon at Indianapolis at noon, we left at 3:30 through Charlotte, which meant the connection, I missed that. And long story short, I got home at 1:30 in the morning. But hey, what are you going to do about it, right? And as I told everybody, it's worth it for the FDIC experience. So all travel woes aside, just no problem at all. Matter of fact, I just set up my laptop in the lounge at the airport and pounded away on some new articles, revising my presentation, and did a bunch of other work while hanging out at the airport. And of course, I love talking to people. So I met more great people, again, showing me there's still good people in the world. So ignore all the nastiness that's out there. And I even hung out with firefighters from other departments from FDIC that were delayed. My good friend, from Knoxville, Tennessee, and also the chief of Oliver Springs, Tennessee Fire Department, Justin Bailey. We hung out at the airport a little bit. And Mark Alone from the West Columbia, Georgia Fire Department, where he serves as a chief. They're actually both presenters as well, and they got delayed a little bit. And we hung out, we talked. What are you going to do? Anyway, what are you going to do? Just a great experience, a great time. But let's get on to the show. And unless you've been living under a rock, you undoubtedly know that OSHA, the Occupational and Safety and Health Administration, they've been making some news lately in the fire service, and they unveiled a proposal to overhaul the 29 CFR 1910-156 standard. Oh, exciting, right? You might know it as the Fire Brigade Standard. Been around for decades, I think, to the early 1980s. And along with that, though, they are seeking input from the public, from the firefighters it's going to affect, prior to making any changes. And it was back in February when they first published the notice that they were looking to modernize this old Fire Brigade Standard and propose some new standards, calling it the Emergency Response Standard. And they want to update this 40-year-old plus standard. It's really only undergone some modest changes since it first came out, and they're going to transform it. That's going to include emergency medical services, tactical rescue, and some other things that we might have to provide as first responders. And volunteer fire departments are not exempt from this. OSHA clearly intends that it's going to apply to volunteer fire departments and volunteer emergency medical services agencies as well. And it's created a buzz. Like I said, unless you've been living under a rock, it's created a buzz. And some are glad to see the recommended changes, and some see it as the demise of the fire service, especially our volunteer fire service. In fact, a common theme I've been hearing is that while several of the proposed provisions might be helpful and improve the safety of the emergency responders, many say they're still opposed to the implementation of the rules just because they believe it's going to place new requirements on emergency services organizations that might make it impossible for many volunteer departments to fully comply. So that's what we're going to dive into on this episode of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Let's see what this buzz is all about, and let's discuss how it may or may not impact our volunteer fire service in a good way or maybe in a bad way. And it's really important. You're going to hear me emphasize this, and I'm sure our guest will as well, that they're seeking public comments from you, from your department and from you as a firefighter. I think the public comment period was extended to June 20th or 21st. We'll talk about that. But OSHA is saying, here's what we are proposing. And if we are soliciting your comments. We want your comments. So that's what we're going to do. And joining me to talk about it is a man who's very familiar with the proposal. He's lectured on it. He's presented on it. He wears a lot of different hats, and I'm glad to call him a friend of mine. His name is Dave Denniston, who has been involved in the fire service for decades now, over 30 years. He's an active member and a past chief of the Cortlandville Fire Department from my state of New York. And he's also a fire commissioner and a regional director for the New York for the Fire Districts Association of the state of New York. He's a deputy fire coordinator for Cortland County. I could go on and on and on. He instructs for the National Volunteer Fire Council, but he's done a lot of work regarding these proposed OSHA standards. He's read about it, he's investigated it, he's lectured on it. So I'm happy to bring him on to educate all of us. Dave, welcome to the show, my brother.
Tommy, it's great to be here. I will echo your comments of FDIC, other than I actually made it home on time. So I thought life was good there.
Flying issues. How the heck?
Yeah, but one of the few trips that actually went well. Like you said, FDIC is just amazing. If folks have never been, they really got to get out there. Met up with hundreds of friends and made hundreds of new ones, and that's always important. The one thing I didn't do is I didn't get to see you out there, and I tried. I even bought the new book, Tom, and you owe me a signing on it. So let's make sure we get that done sometime.
We'll definitely meet up somewhere someday.
We will do that, my friend.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the support. But you're right. It's like I said, there's so many people that I saw, but I got just as long of a list of people I wanted to see that I did not come across at all. Crazy week.
It was. And we kind of got consumed out there again over this OSHA topic. And it amazed me the number of folks that were coming through the booth and talking to us that said, what the heck is this OSHA thing you're talking about? We've never heard of it. We don't know what it is. Does it apply to the volunteers? Does it not apply to the volunteers? How is this going to affect us? And those are the things we've been working on since December. So we've got a long way to go, but let's talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. I know it's got people concerned. It's got people excited. It's got people agitated, the whole realm of emotions. And it's certainly leading to passionate discussions and columns and webinars. But I thought a good place to start, and if you got a better idea, feel free, but to maybe go back a little bit in time. I think it was the early 80s when the OSHA Fire Brigade Standard came out. I believe, if I remember correctly, I know it was a long time ago, I was a young firefighter at the time, and I remember our board of commissioners at the time talking about this new fire brigade standard, something that had never been heard of before, but and it really hasn't changed much, and that's what's leading OSHA to do this. Am I right?
Yeah, there's two things that happened in both of our careers, and a lot of people may remember this. The OSHA standard, when it first came out, everybody got nervous about it and said, oh my gosh, this was really meant for industry. It wasn't meant for us in the fire service. We can't do all these things. Well, at the same time, you got NFPA 1500 coming out, and everybody's getting all excited about those things. But, when we look back at it, that was 44 years ago. And the standard, when it first came out, was pretty simple. Trained firefighters commensurate with the duties they're expected to perform. And it went into more detail than that, but that was kind of the overriding theme of this thing was, hey, we want to keep our workers safe, which I think we all do. And, that's where we're sitting moving forward. But as you look at this thing and, to give a little bit of history of how we got from the standard that was there 44 years ago to where we are today, following the terrorist attacks on 9/11, Congress went to all the federal agencies and said, we got to do a better job. We got to beef up our, national response to natural disasters, terrorist activities, large emergencies. And they tasked all the federal agencies, OSHA being one of them, with looking at where we were and what we could do better moving forward. And that's really what kind of got the wheels started in this whole process.
All the way back then, 2001, the wheels start moving, and here we are, 2024, and now it's coming to fruition.
Absolutely. And, as we look at this thing, and you've already mentioned it, there's some people that are very concerned, and I've heard this is going to be the death of the fire service and lock the doors, throw away the keys, all this kind of stuff. I don't think it's that bad. And when you look at what the intent of this was, and the intent is to keep firefighters safe. And who does not want to keep our firefighters safe
with that?
And do a better job moving those things forward? So, when we look at this thing, there's a lot of people that think, oh, OSHA's the enemy, or here in New York, it's PESH that's the enemy, or, these federal and state agencies, but they have our best interest at heart. And I think we need to first appreciate that and understand they put a lot of work into this thing. And as they went forward and they started crafting this thing and they went, to start to build it, they really did have our best interest at heart. And a lot of people, well, this is government, overstep and all these kind of things. I'm not going down that road. I know there's people that like to think that and want to believe that. That's fine. I think there's room for us all to work together. And I think OSHA really is listening. And I think we have the opportunity to craft this thing moving forward. So
it's funny you say you say that, because I watched the webinar that OSHA put out, the 45 minute webinar, and I found it very interesting, and I was impressed with how committed they were to not just getting feedback, but the focus on firefighter safety. You're absolutely right. Their intentions are pure. It's not the intention of big government bureaucracy. It's not their intention to, create cause the demise of the volunteer fire service. And they did point out, let's face it, the Fire Brigade Standard has not kept pace with changing times. I believe they said something about there's things in that standard about the old turnout gear and not even having bunker pants in there. And it's not kept up with PPE, SCBA, PASS, NIMS, all the things that have been, evolved over time. So I really believe, like you said, their intentions are for taking care of us and making us safer and doing our job better. So it's easy to just dismiss it right away. It's the government, but let's dive into it, right? And see exactly.
As you look at that 44 years, not only has all the equipment and those things changed, but so is our job. I look at the job and you made me sound old, by the way, with that whole carb stuff you did at the beginning, but I'm really not that old, brother.
Experience.
But when you look at how it's changed from when we first got in the fire service to where it is today, and fire behaviors changed, building constructions changed, the tactics and equipment that we've got has changed. So there really was time for this rule to change to come into better focus of what we actually do today.
Yeah, for sure. So who does this apply to, right? It's applying to everybody, correct?
Well, that's kind of the first question, and it's one of the $1 million questions at this point in time. So when we look at the standard, and if you read the 608 pages, and I know most people, probably the listeners, are not going to read 608 pages. They want you and I to do it for them, and then give us the highlights, give us the 30,000 foot view, which we've been trying to do anyway. But when you look at the document itself, it talks a fair amount in there about it really doesn't apply to the volunteer fire service. And then at other places, it talks about one number of firefighters that it might entertain. Another place it talks about a higher number. That's one of the things that, as we've been working with OSHA through this process, they admittedly say, we're not sure how many people this affects at this point in time because of the way that things are structured. So you've got federal OSHA, which is over the entire country. And then you've got state plan states, such as New York is one, Michigan, Indiana.
Can you explain that for maybe some of the listeners that get a little confused with this whole OSHA hierarchy?
So OSHA is the federal government's attempt to make workplaces safer for all workers across the United States. On top of that, each state can either adopt the OSHA plans as written, or they can write their own plan. So like in New York, we have PESH, the Public Employees Organization. Okay. PESH is charged with, they take the OSHA regulation, the OSHA rule standard, and they can either adopt that as, or they can make it stricter than the federal law is. But they can't do anything to make it easier than what the federal standard is. So it's got to be at least as high as that level was intended, and it can't go backwards from there. So you've got 22, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, 22 or 24 states, which are OSHA plan states. On top of that, it's even more confusing because when we look at the volunteer firefighter, it depends on how they're classified in each one of those states. So some states look at the volunteer firefighters as volunteer, they're exempt, they don't fall under the state plan. Other states, they look at the volunteers as employees. So anytime the state looks as the volunteer as an employee, then this rule would affect them as it moves forward. In New York, for example, we are considered a volunteer firefighter in New York is considered an employee because of some court cases that were held mainly to do with the volunteer benefits law, firefighter benefits law, our version of work comp, if you will, and the length of service awards program. So New York has already got court cases with this said here in New York, and that's the way it is in several of the other states. Some states are very confused, and that's one of the things we were hearing at FDIC from people is I had people coming to me from states that I knew were state plan states where the volunteers were considered employees, and they said, no, our state folks are telling us this has got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with the volunteer fire service, so we really don't need to be paying attention. And I challenged them. I said, I think you want to make a couple more phone calls.
Yeah.
Because everything that I'm reading tells me that you would be covered under this new rule and regulation. And several of them were, oh, no, we're pretty sure. But then, Tuesday after FDIC, they're calling me going, oh, my gosh, now we're being told we're straight in the crosshairs of this thing. So there's a lot of questions out there. We've tried to get clarification from OSHA. One of the OSHA questions, and in that 608-page document, OSHA asks us a lot of questions, and they're looking for, in your state, are volunteers considered employees? Do you fall under a state plan? So, a lot of people scratch their head and go, if OSHA can't tell us who this is going to apply to, who can?
Right. If they're getting bad information, I guess that's the first two questions they got to answer. Are they the OSHA state? And do they have to follow these standards? Like, that's a pretty important thing to find out.
It is very important. And that's, one of the things that we're working on in my public comments. That's one of the things I put in there is we really got to get a handle on who this is going to affect and who it isn't. Mm-hmm. And then I always take it a step further and I go, okay, Virgil, New York, my fire district, because my volunteers are considered employees, we're bound by this rule. But if I go out to Kearney, Nebraska, for example, they aren't considered employees, so they wouldn't be covered. And, I always scratch my head and go, the fires don't burn any differently in Virgil, New York than they do in Kearney, Nebraska. And the lives in one place aren't any more important than the lives in the other place. So if it's going to apply to anyone, why wouldn't it apply to everyone? Those are some of the questions that are being asked as well. On top of that, and I've cautioned people, I go, I would really dig hard to find out, are you considered? And we called every state's Department of Labor to ask them the question. We've only had about 19 of them that'll even return an email or phone call and tell us. And I think a lot of that's because they're confused as to where some of these firefighters would fall under this new regulation. But lay all of that aside. If this thing passes as it is and becomes a new federal regulation, new federal standard, okay, I think that's going to be the benchmark that everybody is going to be held to. And I'm more worried about civil liability and some of the cases, God forbid that day we lose a firefighter or injure somebody and somebody brings charges against our organization, regardless of whether OSHA or PESH or whatever agency that's under your state can come in and write us fines. That part of it is only about the fines and the citations. Okay, none of us want that. And I don't want my name in the head of the newspaper or any of that kind of stuff. But what we really should be concerned about is the civil liability. Somebody's now going to pick this thing up and go, here we have a federal standard that said you should have done this. Chief, on this scene, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? No, I didn't. Well, why didn't you?
Yeah.
And I always think back to Lairdsville, New York, and the case that took place in there, and where, that chief of that organization was, tried and convicted using an NFPA standard, which was less than this OSHA rule would be if this thing passes.
Right. It's like those NFPA standards that, you hear over and over again. Well, they're only recommendations, but those are the recommendations that are going to be talked about.
But it's recommendation enough to convince a jury of your peers that you as fire chief should have done something different that day.
Good point. Very good point. You're absolutely right. So, yeah, the naysayers, it's just a recommendation. It doesn't matter. It does matter. It does matter. So what's going to be different? What are some of the things that are good or bad or concerned or not concerned about? Let's dive into the meat and potatoes. What are you seeing?
You get that 608 pages, and at first you're overwhelmed. But the first part of that is basically OSHA's justification. Why do we need these things? They used a lot of the information that the fire service put together. Not too many years ago, a lot of us were fighting to get cancer coverage, and we were trying to show how much more likely a firefighter was in my community than a member of the general public. They took all of that documentation and they go, here, firefighting is dangerous. So we need to beef up the rules, beef up the regulations, and make stuff a little bit tougher. When you get through that part of it, the meat and potatoes is actually in about the last 40, 44 pages. If you go to the Federal Registry, it's about 17 pages because they use a lot smaller print in the Federal Registry. But at the end of it is the regulation itself, which says what we will do, how we will do it, and those aspects. So we encourage people, take a look at the 608 pages, but flip to the back of this book and read the actual regulation itself, read the actual proposed rule and standard itself, and then go from there. And what I've recommended people do, and what we did for my fire district, and I know several other people across the country have done at this point in time, sit down and read that with 4 different color highlighters. So take a green highlighter and highlight the things that are in this proposed rule that you're already doing. Not going to be a big deal for us. We've been doing that forever. So you highlight that in green, you pat yourself on the back and go, hey, we're one step ahead of this process. And then the stuff that you're not currently doing, but you could do without a big lift, put that in yellow. Okay. You know what? We currently don't keep this exact piece of documentation, but it probably wouldn't be a big deal for us. Highlight in that yellow, we've got the capabilities. We don't currently offer this level of awareness training to my department, but one more drill night and we could get this thing knocked out. Mm-hmm. So now you've got those in yellows and start working on those. Those are all really good suggestions and ideas and probably things that we should do. In this business of firefighting, we talk about safety a lot. We give it a lot of lip service, but when push comes to shove, we're our own worst enemies some days. There's some basic things that we could do today to make this job safer that because of pride, because of tradition, because of our sacred cows, we're just not going to do that, Dave. We're going to continue to do things the way we want to do it. And if you've sat through any of my presentations or classes, I've always said we got to do a better job taking care of ourselves. And if we don't, somebody else is going to come in and do it for us through codes and standards. And we're probably not going to like the results. Mm-hmm. But welcome to OSHA 1910-156. Here we are. We didn't take care of ourselves. And now somebody else feels compelled to do that for us. Then take the orange highlighter and highlight those things that are in the document that you don't currently do, you could do, but it's going to cost you a fair amount of money, hours, manpower, things like that. So in the OSHA, and one of the things I highlighted in yellow, in the OSHA document itself, they have estimated it's going to take about 173 hours per department per year to meet the documentation and the administrative pieces of this new regulation. Okay. I don't have anybody sitting around my fire department with 173 extra hours to give me to do these things. I'd love to do them if we had the people, but my chiefs are already maxed out. My captains and lieutenants are maxed out. The secretary, the treasurer, the board members, whoever that is, just doesn't have the time to do these things. So we would have to bring on somebody just to do them. We'd have to hire somebody from the outside to come in and do it. So that's one of the things that I highlighted orange in mine. Yeah, we could do all this extra documentation. There's things in there like you do a lot more pre-planning than you've ever probably done in the past or that I've seen any fire department do. You're doing a community assessment. And a lot of us have kind of done a little bit of a community assessment, but not to the level or detail that would be required in this new rule.
And what are they saying? So, you got to prove that you've done that? Are they asking you to submit?
You need it in writing. You need to have it on file. You need to keep all of that documentation for 5 years. So if something 5 years down the road comes up, you can go back and say, here was our community assessment. Here was our pre-plan. Vacant buildings in your territory are all supposed to have a pre-plan done on them. And then all of that information is supposed to be available to your firefighters on the scene of the call. So now, if you've got an iPad or something where that's there, great. But if you're like a lot of departments that you've got a written pre-plan, it's in a book, it's probably back at the firehouse on the counter somewhere. That's not going to meet the standard because you got to have that available to your folks on the scene. So, as you look at all of that, and in OSHA, when they went through this, they said 173 hours. We anticipate this will cost the average fire department about $4,800 a year to comply with that piece of it. Okay. I did some simple math, and all of a sudden I'm coming out to $23 an hour. And I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to hire somebody for $23 an hour with the expertise to put these things together that they're looking for. So challenge them a little bit on that. And they go, well, here's the data that we use. They use some salary data from back in 2005. I can't hire somebody today at 2005 rates. If I could, send me busloads of them, because I'll take every single one of them. But they just aren't there. So those are some of the things that are in there that I think are problematic, and we probably got to change. And then as you're going through that whole process, take a red highlighter. If there's things in there that you think are just absolutely ridiculous, there's no way your organization can do it, you don't think it should be in there, go ahead and highlight that in red. Okay. One of the areas that's in there that it talks about is having physical barriers around any of our cold zones, warm zones, hot zones, and no entry zones. Okay. Physical barriers of different colors. So I'm sitting there thinking, I got one color fire line tape. Now I would have to go get at least 3 more things of fire line tape and figure out, as this incident is taking place, and it's for any emergency. So now every scene that I go to, that would be a requirement, the way you read this thing. It does say after that, if possible, and I go back to who's going to determine whether it was possible or not. Monday morning after the Super Bowl, I think I could coach my team to win the Super Bowl. But in the heat of the moment, am I going to be able to make that? I think at 9/11, where should the cold zone, warm zone, hot zone, and no entry zone have been? I don't know anybody that could have predicted that or what it could have looked like. So again, those are some of the things that I think need to be taken out or changed or modified in some way, shape, or form. It talks about all of those having a single point of entry. So when I got a firefighter going from the cold zone to the warm zone, it's supposed to be through a single point entry. And I'm supposed to have somebody there monitoring that transition and making sure that firefighter is aware of all the hazards they're going to encounter in that next zone. Again, when I look at my command structure, I don't have enough bodies to make that physically work.
Yeah.
So those are the things in there that, in a perfect world, if we could do it, I'm all for it. But, realistically, in my smaller rural department, we just don't have the bodies or the manpower to do that.
It's not even that it could be a smaller department or low on people power. It's the fact that it's a fast moving, ever changing environment too. Sometimes you got to move and move quick. And you know what? Maybe this sounds baby boomerish of me, but you know what? We're firefighters. It's a dangerous profession. So we know that. So, wow.
So again, as you start peeling this thing back and you look at what the intent is, really good. And I can't find any fault with the intent. But some of the logistics, I'm not sure we had all the right people around the table crafting this thing and putting together to go, hey, real world, real life situations, is this going to work or is it not going to work?
Right.
And that, that's where I find it a little bit problematic. And again, that goes back to, and we've talked to the folks at PESH here in New York. They actually came to us and said, hey, have you guys seen this thing? We're pretty nervous about it because A, we don't know that we've got enough manpower to enforce the thing. And B, we know the fire departments here in New York, and probably a lot of them are not going to be able to meet this thing to the letter of the rule. So, they said, you guys need to get involved at this point in time. And you mentioned right at the start, OSHA is looking for our input. So I hope nobody's thinking that they're just cramming this thing down our throat. It is what it is. It's big government, all those kind of things. OSHA, in my opinion, and I've had a few conversations with them now and different opportunities to engage with them, I truly believe they want to listen. Obviously, they've got several years invested in this process up until this point in time. So, it's about like the bylaws of the fire department. When you go to change those, you get a committee that says, hey, tell us what you guys want. Tell us what you need. Nobody says anything until you bring it to the meeting that night and you go, okay, we're going to change the bylaws. Well, then everybody comes out of their chair and goes, no, we can't do that. And this is why.
Yeah.
So OSHA is asking for our input at this point in time to give them some of the things. One of the things in the process that started this is when they published it on their website back in December, and then it went into the Federal Registry back on February 5th. That started a 90-day public comment period. Okay. If they're truly looking for help and they're truly looking for answers to a lot of these questions, 90 days is nowhere near enough. And that's one of the first things a lot of the organizations that got involved started asking for is we've got to extend this comment period. OSHA did that. That was supposed to have ended on May 6th. Several weeks before May 6th, OSHA said, we hear you. We're going to extend the comment period. They extended it 45 days, which now gives us till June 21st. Personally, and a lot of organizations I'm talking to, we still don't believe that's enough because we still believe there's a lot of fire departments out there, as evidenced by the people talking to us at FDIC, that haven't even heard of this thing.
Right.
So if you want us to make good comments and you want us to make meaningful comments, you got to give us time. So I put another comment into the portal today, said, hey, at a minimum, can you give us till September 21st, an additional 90 days after the June 21st deadline? We're not trying to kick this can down the road. We're trying to digest this thing. You asked me what started this part of the conversation. You said, what's different? And unfortunately, there's no list of you got to start doing all these kind of things. You've got to digest the thing. You've got to understand it. And as a lot of departments are coming to us going, just give us the bullet points. Tell us what we should be concerned about. I don't run your fire department. So what's painful and stressful for me and my organization, you may have enough people or expertise to pull that off and think nothing of it. Okay. Some things that I think are pretty simple for us to do. Fire department down the road, probably isn't going to be able to do some of those things. So it is really important that folks get into that last 40 pages and start to figure it out for themselves. What does this mean? What doesn't it mean?
So
Okay.
where do they find it?
So there's a number of different places you can get it off from the Federal Registry. So if you go to the Federal Registry, you type in OSHA 1910-156, it'll bring up the proposed document. You can go to the end of it. There's a lot of places. So the Association of Fire Districts, State of New York, afdsny.org, stood up a site very early on to put all the information on so that people had a one-stop shop and place to go. Because what we found was there was a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of stuff that wasn't accurate. So we wanted one simple, easy place for them to go. So if you Google Association Fire District, State of New York, you go to their website, there's a big red box on there, it says OSHA. Click on that box. You can find the 608-page document. You can find the last 40 pages of that document. And I had a call from OSHA today. OSHA's been to that site. So they're looking at the site. They're watching our webinars. They're doing all that kind of stuff. I'm going, great. We're engaged. And this is great things. The one document that we had up on there, they said that's not the latest version of it. That was one that they worked with the Sabrifa panel as they put some things together. So we removed that off today and we put the right one up on there. So again, we encourage people, know your sources, get the most accurate data, but get that piece out of it.
And again, New York State Association of Fire Districts. Yes, it's New York State, but this is a big deal, folks. It's applying across the country.
I can tell you that
non-OSHA states. This is definitely something to be aware of.
And NVFC, National Volunteer Fire Council, we met last week. We've got a special task force now that is working on this project. Again, trying to get the word out, trying to get information out. I'm heading that task force up with them. We stood up a website last week. Again, a lot of the same information. So nvfc.org, another excellent place to go get the information at your fingertips. They've got recordings. Keene College was one of the very first ones that did a webinar on this. They did a great job trying to explain some of it. OSHA has done a number of webinars on this, trying to get the information out. Association of Fire Districts, we've done a number of webinars. NVFC has done a number of webinars. NVFC's got another webinar coming up where they're going to have two of the folks, the architects of this thing from OSHA, talking about it. I've been on a couple of other national webinars with them. So the stuff is out there if you Google it and find it. But there is some misinformation out there as well. So we caution people
and
about
they
that.
also ask that don't just say you're opposed or you hate something. Be constructive with what your concerns are.
One of the first conversations I actually got to have with a couple of the architects of this, they gave me 3 examples of comments that had put in, and they were along the lines of, this is going to kill the fire service as we know it, lock the doors, throw away the keys, all this kind of stuff. Some that we probably shouldn't repeat any of the words that were in, calling OSHA all kinds of names in the books and those kinds. They go, while that shows us emotion, it really doesn't tell us anything that's going to be helpful here.
Right.
So we're doing a webinar here coming up that's going to tell people how to write a good, effective public comment. That's another one that'll be available at afdsny.org or nbfca.org if you didn't get the chance to watch those live.
That's important. People need help sometimes with that because not everybody can craft, good rebuttals.
I can tell you at this point in time, there's only about 800 comments that have been put in from across the country. There's only about 23 or 4 states that have anybody from that state has commented. But on top of the comments of the fire service and their concerns, there's a lot of private citizen content in those numbers. There's some people that I think that must be what they do is they read federal stuff and then they comment on it because some of these are just off the wall. But so when I look down through, it's really hard to find good examples of the things. Like I said, one of the things that's up on both the NBFC site and the FDSNY site is a list of questions that OSHA is asking, and they're asking very specific questions. One of the things that I find problematic in the new rule would be some of the health requirements and the physicals that we would have to have now for our firefighters. And then they used a number of 15 IDLH exposures. So a firefighter would have to have a physical every 2 years. If they're exposed to 15 IDLHs, then they would have to have some additional surveillance testing done as well. We ask OSHA, where did you come with the 15 number? Can you show me the data or the science behind that? And they said, we tried to find that and we really didn't. So we had to start somewhere. That's one of the questions they're asking. Is 15 appropriate? Is it too many? Is it not enough?
Right.
Should we look at that number? So they're asking us those kind of questions, and that's what they're looking for in comments. So I tell people it's so important that we get our comments and periods in. If only a few people talk about this, probably we're not going to see any changes, and OSHA is not going to have the information they need to make meaningful changes to this document. But if we can show, in a good statement, in a good comment in that portal, tell your story. I am the XYZ Fire District located in upstate New York. We serve a community of this number of citizens with this many volunteer firefighters. My annual budget is this. So like in my comment that I put in there, I used all that demographic data for my response area. Okay, painted the picture, told the story. When we go and look at it, and one of the things we haven't talked about yet, I talked about that exercises of doing the highlighter colors and all of that kind of stuff. On top of those 40 pages, there's 22 NFPA standards, which are now incorporated by reference. So what that means is, as part of this rule, those 22 NFPA standards become part of the rule. So anywhere in those documents where it says shall or must, that is now something that we would be required to do to meet the letter of the rule as it goes forward. So I've served on a few NFPA tech committees. I know there was some shells and musts in there. I tasked one of my folks with, I said, hey, go through these standards and tell me some of the pain points. Tell me some of the things. And I checked in with him a couple of days later. I said, Joe, where are you at? And he goes, well, I got 1,500. I said, 1,500 what? He goes, shells and musts. I go, no, you didn't understand the assignment. There can't be that many additional rules that are now becoming part of this thing. And he pulls out the list and he shows it to me. And I go, oh my gosh, there's 1,500 additional things.
Wow.
So in the 40 pages, it talks about the need for firefighter physicals. It talks about the need for the surveillance testing. What it doesn't talk about is NFPA 1582 is now incorporated by reference. So as we read that and peel it back, in order for my fire department to do a physical that would meet the requirements at NFPA 1582, we would have to go to a completely different level. I had a commissioner call me and he goes, Dave, what are you budgeting next year for physicals? I go, we've been doing 1582 physicals for years. I don't see where there's going to be any difference. He goes, are you sure you're doing 1582 physicals? I go, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what we're doing. He goes, you may want to check with your provider. So I called our provider and I said, are you doing an NFPA 1582 compliant physical? He said, well, we use 1582 as a guideline and we use the checklist that comes out of 1582, but we're in no way, shape, or form certifying that this is an NFPA 1582 compliant physical. And we're currently paying about $300 a firefighter per year. So I said, okay. I said, well, what's it going to cost me to get an NFPA 1582 compliant physical? He said, well, first of all, we probably can't do that for you because we don't have the staff, we don't have the right people on board, and these people, that's what they do, is they go around and do firefighter physicals. We have them come into the station, do our physicals for us, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, geez, if they can't do it, who can? And you start calling around, and I don't know if you remember a couple of years back when they changed the DOT physical requirements. And I used to be able to go down to my local physician and get that done. Now I've got to go someplace special. If this thing were to pass it as it is, as I read it today, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm only trying to read a standard and understand it, read this rule and understand it. I think we would have a lot fewer choices of who's going to provide those physicals for us. And my provider said, if we were to do that, we think it's going to be somewhere in the $1,290 to $1,500 per physical range. If you go to the new FEMA grant standards, they allow that price range for physicals under the grant program. So they're of the same belief that a full NFPA compliant physical is going to be that price range. At FDIC, I got to have lunch with one of the fire chief out there that I've known for years. He said they called their provider and they're telling this city organization, you guys better start budgeting $4,500 a year per physical to do the physical up to this standard and do all the surveillance testing, which would now be required as well. I think that number is astronomical, and we don't want people to run and go, oh, my physicals are now going to cost $4,500. I can't tell you that. That's what you've got to look at. Who's doing your physicals? Who's your provider? And make that phone call yourself and say, can you do this physical for me? And if you do, what's it going to cost?
I mean, that's a major red flag right there. I mean, we got, as you well know, and you talk to as many volunteer firefighters as I do, there's departments out there that got to do chicken dinners and bingo just to get the equipment they need. And they're not going to have these resources. And then there's the municipalities that, when you tell them they're going to have to help out, they're going to balk at that. So we have an expression in New York State. I know you've heard this before, but for my listeners, unfunded mandates.
Exactly.
Right? Who's covering these costs? Holy cow. And this is just one aspect. So there's a major concern.
Right. But as people are writing their comments, I mean, that's what we really need to stress. Don't put a comment that says unfunded mandate or this is ridiculous. Tell the story just like I did.
Yeah.
My personal experience, what I found out on my own. That's over 12% of my annual fire district budget that we would have to use to cover the difference in price between physicals. I can't take 12% of my budget to do that. That would severely affect the fire protection I can give my community. Those are the stories that OSHA needs to hear and how it's going to hurt. To get people to understand, there's a lot of the NFPA standards that have been incorporated, the changing of tires at every 7 years, the taking your vehicles and getting them weighed annually. There's a number of things that you kind of got to look through an NFPA standard and go, what's this going to cost me on an annual basis to do this? Could I even afford it? Some of the training requirements that are in there. Here in New York, we've been working with some of the fire academies down on Long Island. They have the Nassau and Suffolk fire academies down there. Up in upstate New York, Office of Fire Prevention and Control does a lot of it. I can tell you OPC right now is looking at, do we offer the training that would be required under this? And if we do we have enough hours to do it? Do we need to train instructors and all of those kind of things? So, Nassau and Suffolk put some numbers together. They figured it would take their basic firefighter training from 120 some hours, whatever it is today, up over 200 and some hours in order to meet the NFPA standards that would be covered by this rule. So now I've got a volunteer that walks through the door, and we talk about recruitment and retention all the time. And I got to say to this young kid coming through the door, hey, before I can put you in a turnout coat and pants and give you a hand line and put you through that front door, I got to have you give me 268 hours of training so that I can do that. And they're going to go, you know what? I think I'm going to go volunteer down at whatever other groups in town because I don't have that much time.
What are some of the things they're adding to the training or recommending to add to the training that's taking it up to that many hours?
Right. As you do your community assessment, or as another part that we didn't talk about, the fire department would be required to do a risk management plan. What are those things that could occur in my district? And there's some things that, grass and brush fires, wildland fires, those type of things. We get some grass fires around here, but we really don't do a lot of wildland firefighting, but we could. And every once in a while we get called to one of those. I would need to make sure that my people all had awareness level training to respond to one of those. and then a technician or specialist level training to actually do work once we get to those. So, as you incorporate the NFPA standards in there, it talks about all this additional requiring that they would have to have. One of the things that's been a big concern to people is you look at officer training and you look at the officer requirements in the NFPA standard, which has been incorporated. There's a lot of folks out there that believe that would now require captains and lieutenants to be Fire Officer 1 trained, assistant chiefs to be trained to Fire Officer 2 level, and chief officers to be trained to Fire Officer 3 level in order to fill those positions. Here in New York, Fire Officer 1 has been fairly available out in the field. Fire Officer 2, they're just moving out into the field so we can get some of those courses here. Fire Officer 3 really hasn't made it there yet. As we talked to the folks from our training center, and I was talking to folks from Indiana today and some of their training concerns with this thing as well, they're going, hey, it would take us 5 to 6 years to get those courses spun up, to get the instructors trained, and to get people out there in the field able to do this. When you look at OSHA's timeline that they would like to incorporate this, a lot of that stuff would be required by year 2. Well, there's just physically not the bandwidth or the capacity to do that out there. Kind of interesting having a conversation with, some folks of mine, friends down from the island in New York City. There's a past chief of the FDNY who's retired, who's now in their local fire department. If this rule goes through as stands with the incorporated NFPA standards, he would not be eligible to be the chief officer of that local volunteer fire department. And yet he ran the biggest fire department, one of the biggest fire departments in the country. Those are the things that got people a little bit excited going, man, that's concerning.
Yeah. So are there some good things in there?
There's absolutely good things in there. And, I think there's a lot of things that could be in there that aren't in there. And I encourage people to do that too. We met down last week was the Congressional Fire Institute. So we went down and, to Washington. We lobbied on the Hill. We talked to our congressional representatives, made some of our concerns heard. And most all of them said, what's your alternative? How do we do something to make firefighting safety without doing this? And they're really looking at alternatives. And I think they're right. We can't just go, no, we don't want this. We got to say what the alternatives. And I've come up with a number of things that I think could make firefighting immediately safer, that wouldn't cost a dime, that we could start doing that are good. One of the things it does require is it would require everybody to wear seatbelts now. That's in the new proposed standard. Okay. But then in that standard as well, they talk about, ambulances and people working in the back of the ambulances, and they'd have to have a tethered harness system and all these kind of things, unless they were doing patient care, and there's some gray level in that. And then it goes on to say, unless you're transporting Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny for public parade events, and then you just need some kind of, plan to keep them safe. And I'm going, if we got to wear seatbelts for everybody, I love the public service events and all those kind of things, but should there really be an exception in the OSHA rule for Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? I don't think so. That was one I highlighted red and go, this has got to go. This has got to go. But, the wearing of seatbelts, that's great. And we should all be doing that anyway. When you look at our response standards, they talk in there, for as detailed as this thing is, it's pretty vague in some areas as well. They say that the authority having jurisdiction has got to have response plans and things in place. I've been an advocate for years. We need to start stopping at negative right-of-way intersections. When we got a red light or we got a stop sign, bring the rig to a stop, make sure the intersection is clear, and then proceed on through. That didn't make it in here. I've got data and statistics that show that could have an immediate impact on firefighters' safety and health. Okay. So those are some of the things that, as you're looking at this thing and peeling it back, there are some things that we could do that aren't here, that probably aren't in the current OSHA standard. That why aren't we doing these things?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in there on your gear and how you keep your gear, keeping it separate in the rig, not having contaminated gear in the living area of the fire station or in the, passenger compartment of the vehicles. That's all good stuff, and probably things that we should be doing anyway. But again, we need some time to implement this. We need a plan to phase it in, and we need to go, maybe in every circumstance, this isn't going to be practical. We need to think of what some of those are and write that into the rule as well.
So I was going to ask what some of the response recommendations are. So there's nothing about seatbelts, but they're really focusing on the gear. Are they advising to not don the gear before getting off the rig, or not don it while riding to the call? What are they saying?
So the seatbelt thing is in there, and it says that everybody should be seated and belted with your truck. I 100% agree with that. I think it's great.
I thought we put that one to bed 20 years ago, but
most of us tried to, but I got to tell you, there's pride and tradition in those sacred cows that we talked about earlier.
Right.
There's still fire departments out there doing stupid things. We've got to wake ourselves up here at some point too and go, we got to do a better job.
Yeah.
When you look through the line of duty death reports, and I read every single one of them, and I always ask myself these questions: could that happen in my district tonight? Okay. And most of the time I go, yep. And then when I read the reports on them and I see what the failures were, we failed to wear a seatbelt. We failed to do a 360 inspection. We failed to do this, that, or the other thing. I scratch my head and go, why is anybody failing to do these things? That all would make sure that that's all in that standard as well as we move forward. But when it comes to the actual response things, and, there's some great NFPA standards that talk about, tankers and tenders and vehicles that carry over a certain number of gallons of water, if they don't have baffled tanks, should not be operated in emergency mode. I look at tankers and tenders a lot going, they're really not an emergency vehicle. If we can't knock this thing out, we can't put the fire out with that first 2,000, 4,000 gallons of water we got on the scene, we probably aren't doing our job right. Now it's just mop up and clean up anyway. So when I see tankers and tenders, 8 hours into a barn fire where all we've got burning is a pile of hay somewhere, that all you're doing is making a mess for the farmer to have to clean up afterwards. And these guys are still running lights and sirens and using specific exemptions. What are we thinking? What are we doing here? So those are the things that, we should be presenting and going, we can do a better job.
Yeah, we can do a better job policing ourselves in a lot of different areas. That's for sure. No doubt. So what would be, if put you on the spot a little bit here, what do you like the most about
it? What I like the most about it is, again, I think it does look at firefighter safety. It asks a lot of tough questions. It talks about some things that we probably have swept under the rug for years. There's a lot of stuff in there on not only the physical health of the firefighters, but fit for duty of our firefighters. Okay. And it talks about every 3 years having some kind of standardization testing, like a CPAT test or something that the firefighters would have to demonstrate. I can still drag somebody across the floor. I can climb a ladder. I can drag a hose line, but it talks about those in tiers. So one of the things we would have to do is tier our firefighters into interior, exterior, and some departments do a really good job of that. And other departments, when the whistle blows and I end up with a crew of 78-year-old plus people on the rig, and I'm not knocking 78-year-old people in any way, shape, or form. That's what we got. It's like, okay, put an air pack on and get in there and put this fire out. Probably that's not a great idea.
Right.
So some of the things I do like about it is it's getting us to ask some tough questions. It's getting us to examine the way that we do business, and it's forcing these conversations of how do we do better as fire service organizations to keep our people safe at the end of the day.
The sad thing is that there's not going to be answers for some departments because they are composed of 70-year-old members, and it's no disrespect at all. It's no one else is stepping forward. So there's going to be some major challenges there for a lot of departments, I'm afraid.
That was another thing that was kind of a common theme when we got down there on the Hill in Washington, and we're talking to some of our congressional representatives. They're going, the volunteer fire service is great. We've got all this data on the money that it saves its citizens. And, FASNY here in New York did the study, $40-some billion. They figure the volunteer fire service saves the taxpayers in New York and all those kind of things. But they go, you guys do some stuff pretty crazy as well. And we do. And we need to look at some of that. And they go, do your trucks really need gold leaf lettering on the outside of them? Do you really need 18 trucks in every fire station that you got when you haven't got enough people to drive those trucks to a scene? And I sit there thinking about, our last fire, and when we had to call mutual aid in to come stand by in our station, and they couldn't park their truck in the station because we still got trucks that we never got out of the barn. So you got to look at it. Are all these vehicles necessary? Is the way we've always done business necessary? And the congressional folks, they were going, do we need as many independent fire service organizations as you have? And, they start talking about things. And, when you mention consolidation, I know some people get all kinds of nervous and all kinds of upset. And they're saying, we're not talking about closing firehouses. We're not talking about closing individual stations. But can a group of you get together and have some efficiencies and do a better job? Now you've got some more manpower. Now you've got, if you can only get 2 trucks out of your barn on any given day, do we need 8 more trucks sitting there, or do we distribute them somewhere else in the community where there's other people that can go and get 2 more and more people that can come get 2 more?
Right.
So, the best thing out of all of this for me is it started some of these tough conversations. If you look at this thing as proposed and as written, I think it would have devastating effects to the way we deliver fire service in this country today. No way, shape, or form about that. I think it's there. I don't think it's going away. I think this train is coming at us clearly down the tracks. And I think we need to jump on board, and we need to make sure that our thoughts and comments are heard. We need to give detailed, realistic information as to what all this means and how we can work with them to make something that's usable for all of us, because it's not going to go away.
And you can't just dig your heels in and cry that this isn't fair, or you're not.
We can.
It's not the professional thing to do, right? And the professional thing to do is exactly what you said: is to form some very good comments, rebuttals, statistics, information of how this will affect you and your department, and take that highlighter out, like you said, the 4 different colors, and go get the information and read it over. And you have till June 21st. If I don't know if they'll extend it again, but to put some good comments together. Do you mind again telling people where they can get the National Volunteer Fire Council has it?
So I like short web addresses, because I could give you the whole long web address and you remember typing it. NVFC, National Volunteer Fire Council.org. And that's 4 letters.org. Most people should be able to write that down or go Google that and find it somewhere. Go to their website, and they've got an OSHA place there. AFD, Association of Fire Districts, State of New York. So AFDSNY.org. Same thing. Good, easy, short address. Go look at the box there. All the information is there. Click through it and read it. You got to spend some time on this thing, Tom. This is not something, everybody goes, just give us the quick fix. There is no quick fix on this thing. We have got to roll up our sleeves. We got to do our job. You mentioned professional before, and I know that's your whole stick and your whole livelihood has been the professional volunteer fire department. We need to act like that sometimes.
Right.
And we need
to
understand.
Work. It takes work.
It does it.
The fire service of yesteryear was great, and they did amazing things and got us to where we are today, and they're to be commended. But times change, and we need to change with the times, and we need to act like a professional and do things in a professional manner, and that includes, in this case, reading and digesting and putting thought to words to have some intelligent rebuttals and see what might work for you, and don't be afraid to dispute what might not, but do it in a very business-like, professional manner.
You know what that highlighter project did for me is it made me take a good, serious, solid look at my organization. And I sat there going, we're pretty good. When I got done, I got a lot of green on that page, and I'm like, yeah, we're not doing too bad. And then I had some yellow, and I go, yeah, we could do these things and move this thing forward. And then, I look at some of the rest of it, and I go, we got some work to do.
Right.
But it'll give you the opportunity, if nothing else, to take a good, serious look at your organization. How are you structured? How are you funded? Like you mentioned, the same people that I'm asking to learn how to drag hand lines and do all that kind of stuff, I'm asking to come in on, next Friday to cook chickens, and Sunday morning to cook pancakes, and we're having car washes and doing all this kind of stuff. I'm asking the same people to do my fundraising that I'm asking to go out there and fight the fires. Probably we need to rethink that whole idea and
Absolutely.
Say, we got to do things differently.
And that's my challenge to, if there's any politicians listening to the podcast, you want us to change, you want us to embrace consolidations and new ideas on how to deliver this essential service. Well, it's time that we look at new funding alternatives to help support us in our mission and take the chicken barbecue out of the equation and the field days as a source of revenue to get the very essential tools and provide now these extra services that maybe it's the physical examinations, the tracking, whatever it is. Maybe it's a pre-planned program to meet that part of it, but we're going to need help. Volunteer fire departments are going to need help. And you want us to change? We will. I'm encouraged, Dave, by what I see in my area. Change is hard. But I am encouraged with the new generation asking those questions that you just asked about. Maybe when it's time to replace this rig, we don't because next door they have one. Or maybe we don't need two ladders right next to each other, but we'll have maybe a big rescue truck. So we get the extrication call, we come help you. I'm encouraged by seeing that. So it's coming. Some of it's going to be forced, but some of it's coming naturally. And that's the credit to the intelligence and professionalism of today's leaders. But I challenge the politicians out there, the ones with their hands on the funds, to help us figure out the funding for what we need to do this very important job. And if these new standards come through, what we're going to need to do to keep our people rightfully safe and secure and healthy.
Absolutely. And a call to arms at this point, folks, you've got to go find this thing. You've got to digest it. You got to understand it. And we need you to go in there and make meaningful public comment at this point in time.
Meaningful.
This is our opportunity to have a say, to have a seat at the table, to move some things forward. But it isn't going to happen with the few comments that are dribbling in at this point in time. We need to get people motivated and working on this.
Nothing's final at this stage. Now is the time to take action and to be heard. It's critical that you submit a public comment, that your agency does, and as you as an individual, and the resources are there to do it. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, Dave, to talk more about it or had a specific question, is there a particular way you would like them to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. I can give my phone number, 607-423-1636, 607-423-1636. You can email me, ddenniston@afdsny.org. Find me on Facebook. I post pretty cool pictures of sunsets and crap. but we do a lot of fire stuff on there as well. So
check them out on Facebook. I say it all the time. My wife has farm fantasies. She loves farms, and I always say one of these days you're going to have a knock on your door because we're coming through, and you have beautiful property. And he's right. He posts amazing photos all the time. I don't know how you have time to do what you do, but
I got a lot of people that have reached out on Messenger and those type of things. Again, they just looked up the name and got a hold of me that way, but we've had great conversations with that.
Wow, so that's great.
We are here. We're invested in this thing. We spent hours and hours and hours since December in New York. We started a focus group back in December. We meet every week for at least an hour. We talk about this thing. We talk about the plans moving forward. We're doing the same thing at NVFC now. Again, we're trying to make sure the word gets out there and spread. So if anybody's got any questions, reach out, phone a friend, ask, and let's do this thing together.
Yeah, let's be united and do it together and make a difference, a positive difference. And I really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule to come on my podcast and educate myself as well as the listeners about this important topic. Thank you so very, very much.
You're entirely welcome. Thanks for having us again. The more we can do to get the word out there, I think the better off we'll be when this thing, reaches its final stage.
And don't bury your head in the sand and think it's not going to affect your department, your agency, because it will. It will. And so thank you. Thank you very much for being on. And again, thank you to you listeners for tuning in and hopefully getting some good information on this very, very important topic. Reach out to Dave. If anybody needs to reach out to me for anything, please. It's tamerrill63@aol.com. You can get me on Facebook Messenger. Please give my Professional Volunteer Fire Department page a like. Check out my website. You'll see where I'm going to be. I'm traveling all over. Where am I headed to tomorrow? 2 days. No, I'm going to Cooperstown, New York in 2 days for a presentation there with the great professional volunteers in Cooperstown area. Looking forward to that. And again, if anyone would like to get a copy of my book, The Professional Volunteer Fire Department, reach out to me. I'd be happy to sign one and send it off to you.
Just make sure he signs it. That's all we ask. So.
I owe you, brother. I definitely owe you. So, but reach out to me. My next show will be on June 18th, and we'll have another great topic with some more great guests. And until then, please always remember that true professionalism is never defined by a paycheck. And folks, your residents are owed professional service delivered by professional firefighters representing a professional organization. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless. Thank you for listening in. Take care.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by enforced technology. Only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.